Welcome to our virtual teaching kitchen class. Today, as you all know, we're going to be making a twist on the classic panzanella salad. So panzanella salad is like a veggie-based salad with bread, cubed bread, and a vinaigrette. And the vinaigrette gets like nice and soaked into the bread and it gives it lots of flavor. So we're also adding some other ingredients to that salad that are going to make it more of like an entree. A classic panzanella salad is kind of like a side salad. It's not super sustaining and filling, but what we are adding today is going to give more protein, more fiber, some fat as well. That's going to keep us nice and satisfied. So we're making this into an entree salad. This is also a great option for a very hot day like today because you don't need to use a lot of heat. There's only a little bit of oven time and then you can shut off your oven and your kitchen's going to stay nice and cool. So just a few safety items up front. So always make sure that you've washed all of your produce before we start. That includes washing your lemons outside, even though you're not eating the peel, because you cut through the lemon from the outside through the inside. So any, bacteria on the outside could go into the inside. So safe to just wash everything very well. Also, it's very important, those of you who have been here before, you hear me say this every time, but a very sharp knife is actually safer than a dull knife. If your knife is very dull, it's not going to get a good grip on your food and it's going to slip and you're more likely to cut yourself. If it's a nice sharp knife, especially when we're cutting these tomatoes, tomato skin can be very hard to cut with a dull knife. So you want a nice sharp knife. That's going to make your job much easier. And when you're handling all of the hot things going in and out of the oven, make sure you have an oven mitt. Just be extra cautious of the heat as well. And that's about it. There's not a lot of safety stuff to talk about today. We don't have like any raw meat or anything like that. So I'm going to talk about our plan of work for the day. That's like the process by which we are going to go through the recipe and finish at the same time. So the first thing we're going to do is toast our bread and our pine nuts. So that's going in the oven first and it's going to be done. It doesn't take very long to toast. So then we'll pull it out as we're finishing other things. Then we make our vinaigrette. Then we chop all of our veggies and herbs and everything, throw them into the vinaigrette and toss them all up. And then we compose our salad. Then we serve. So it's really easy. This is a very easy dish. Which is great. Everybody loves an easy, delicious dish. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna prep our bread. I've got some whole wheat rolls here. These, I chose whole wheat because these are higher in protein and fiber. They're much more filling that way. And we're gonna be cutting these into like 2-inch cubes, something like that. If you prefer it to be smaller because it will be crunchy when it's toasted, then go ahead and cut it smaller. But this is like a dinner roll size, just so you're, aware of what size I'm working with. So I'm going to cut this. I'm using a bread knife. It's got the serrated blade. That makes it way easier to cut bread. So I'm cutting it. So I cut it in half like this. And now I'm going to cut across and across one more time. So this one dinner roll just gave me 8 pieces. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing with my other rolls here. And the recipe that you all received is for 4 servings. You can feel free to modify that however you'd like. Also, what I consider a serving might not be what you consider a serving. So feel free to adjust it. The recipes are always meant to be a guideline. Some people need a bit more help with more guidance in the kitchen. They're not sure how much of certain ingredients to add. So the recipe is helpful in that way, but it's not necessary. So the more comfortable you get in the kitchen, the less you actually need recipes. Okay, so I've got all my pieces of bread here. I'm going to grab a sheet pan because we're going to put this in the oven. Okay, so what I'm going to do is throw all these bread cubes on this sheet pan. And I'm going to drizzle some olive oil and some salt and just toss it all together. So let's see. According to the recipe, if you're following that, that says 2 tablespoons of olive oil and a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Or you can just kind of eyeball it. So I'm drizzling olive oil The reason I'm using olive oil is because it's got a really delicious flavor, and this is an Italian-inspired recipe. So that's what we're going with. Sometimes olive oil is not the best option. I'm just taking a pinch of salt and just drizzling it. But if you wanted to follow the recipe, it's a 1/4 teaspoon. Sometimes olive oil is not the best option when you're using heat. Example, if you're like pan frying something, because olive oil can get really smoky, where something like canola oil, that's more of a neutral oil, doesn't get very smoky. But if we're throwing something in the oven, and this is only going in for like 10 minutes, it's not a long time at all, it's not gonna get too smoky, it'll be totally fine. So I'm making sure it's in a single layer. I don't want it to, you know, I want all these pieces of bread to be exposed to the same amount of heat in the oven. So for ease of cleaning up, I'm switching over to the other empty side of my sheet pan, and I'm adding pine nuts. Here are my pine nuts. So you can use a separate sheet pan if you prefer, because these won't cook the same amount of time. The pine nuts are going to be quicker than the bread, but I'm just doing this for ease of cleanup. So again, spreading this out. This doesn't need any salt or oil. Pine nuts, if you've never tasted pine nuts before, or even if you have, I encourage you to try some of these right now and compare the taste before and after toasting. It's really like drastic how much the flavor is kind of like amplified, and what is it? Like the depth of the flavor is increased the longer you toast it, that kind of thing. The toasting, the heat helps like develop the flavor of the pine nuts, like the floral flavor of the pine nuts. So I'm just changing my gloves because they're all oily, and I'm gonna go throw this in the oven. So again, the oven is at 375, and I'm gonna set a timer for just 5 minutes first, because I wanna make sure that my pine nuts don't burn. And then I'm gonna take those out. I'll come and show you them when they're nice and toasty. And then I'll put it back in for the bread to finish, probably another like 3 to 5 minutes. So it's, again, it's not very long. So I'm gonna go throw this in. I encourage you to do the same. In the meantime, Samantha can ask you all what's going on.
All right, who is cooking today?
I am Bev.
All right, and Cynthia, are you cooking along as well?
I am.
Great, exciting. Yeah, the great thing about this is that you can, rewatch it later and continue to cook from home.
Yeah, I mean, I hope they will rewatch it. You know, some people tell me that they are a little bit intimidated to cook along live with us because they're not as confident with their kitchen skills, but that's okay. That's why we send you the recording afterward, so that you can watch it again. You can pause it if I'm going too fast, so you can do it at your own pace. All right. So we've got our, putting my gloves on here. We've got our bread and our, oh, Bev asked, am I doing a half recipe? I think I'm doing the full recipe. I might not have used as much bread as all of you, but use as much bread as, or pine nuts as you like. Sometimes I do a half recipe because usually I do the test run the night before and bring it home for dinner, and then I do it this night and bring it home for dinner, so I get a lot of it. But I didn't do the test run last night, so I'm gonna make a full recipe tonight. All right, so now we're gonna make our vinaigrette, and we'll pause this when the buzzer goes off on the oven. So according to New York Times, anyone follow the New York Times recipe app? I love that app, it's got great recipes. But they say that when you build your vinaigrette in a bowl and then you add your ingredients to the vinaigrette and mix it all together, it gets more well coated with the vinaigrette than if you drizzle the vinaigrette on top and then toss it together. So that's what we're doing here. When I was testing and creating this recipe, I did find that it coated very well, so that's what we're doing. So we've got just like a big empty bowl. This is a big bowl here, because the whole salad is going to be assembled in this bowl. I also have a very helpful tool. This is a microplane. Struggling with the camera. So, looks like this. It's also got like a cupped inside, so you can like kind of catch whatever you grate, you can sort of catch it inside. So we're gonna be grating a garlic clove. This clove is not super big, your average size garlic clove, but I'm gonna grate the whole thing in here, okay? So, oh, is that 5 minutes already? It's the fastest 5 minutes ever. So my oven buzzer is going off. I'm gonna finish grating this garlic. So oftentimes it gets stuck underneath. So you just tap it and it comes right out. So the inside of the microplane is not sharp. You can scoop that out with your finger if you need to. So we've just got one garlic clove grated in there. The next thing you're gonna do is grate about a 1/4 cup of Parmesan. So I'm gonna go and grab my bread real quick, or my pine nuts. I'll be right back, but you can start grating Parmesan.
How's everybody doing?
Okay, so these pine nuts are lightly toasted, that's perfect. My sheet pan is not the prettiest, so I apologize, but I hope you can see the color difference here. There's definitely some toasty colors there.
We have a question for you. Are we taking out the bread as well or just the pine nuts?
If your bread looks done, then you can take it out, but I'm just taking out the pine nuts right now. So I'm scooping it into a bowl, the pine nuts, and I'm gonna put the bread back in for another 5.
Then we have another question. Is
Okay,
toasting pine nuts just for taste? And this is from Chow.
is it just for taste?
Yeah, is toasting the pine nuts just for taste?
Yes, yeah. It might make them like a little bit crunchier, but pine nuts are a very soft nut. So they're kind of like cashews, the consistency, so it's gonna stay soft even when it's roasted. But the toasting really brings out the flavor. It's so much better, trust me. I'm gonna put this bread back in. It's not quite toasted yet. So I'm gonna stick it back in another 5 minutes. I'll be right back.
Great questions in the chat too.
Okay, I set it for like 6 minutes. So I think the ovens here, I am in a commercial kitchen, so the ovens are a bit faster than home ovens. If yours is not done yet, your pine nuts are not toasted yet, that's okay. You don't have to be at the same pace as me. The pine nuts and the bread don't need to be added till later, so it's not gonna slow you down. All right, so back to our vinaigrette. So I mentioned that the recipe calls for a 1/4 cup of Parmesan. I'm just gonna eyeball it. You can decide how much you want to add based on how much Parmesan you like. So a traditional Panzanella salad, oh, let's see, what's that question? Would it be just as good to saute the bread and pine nuts? You could toast it in a pan. Yeah, you definitely don't have to toast it in the oven. You also can, so we added olive oil and salt to the bread to make it like a bit more flavorful. But the bread is going to soak in the vinaigrette, so it will get additional flavor from there. So if you want a shortcut with the bread, just toast your bread in a toaster and rip it into pieces. That's also a great way to just like add crunchy croutons to a salad. That's what I usually do when I make salad at home. You don't have to make fancy croutons, just toast it like you're making toast for breakfast. Very easy. All right, so I've got, it's probably a little bit more than a 1/4 cup, but that's okay. So we've got only grated garlic and grated parm in here. That's all we've got in here so far. So the next thing we do is add some lemon juice. So I've got a lemon here. In order to, this is especially helpful with this lemon is very firm. in order to get a lot of juice out of your lemon, it's really helpful to put one hand over the other, put a little pressure down and roll it. And when you roll the lemon, you want to feel it kind of squishing under your hands. You want it to get nice and soft. Doesn't have to be crazy squished, but you want it to be less firm than it was when you started. That's happening because you're like releasing the juices from the inside. So we've got our lemon, top and bottom. I'm going to slice it across. Right. And I've got a juicer just to make sure I don't get any seeds in there. I know it seems like the lemon should go like this because it fits in the cup. It actually should go like this. All right, so the recipe calls for 1 tablespoon plus 1 teaspoon, but I'm, again, eyeballing it. I love lemon, so I will always add lots of lemon juice to any dressing I make. But if you're more partial to like a less acidic dressing, then no need to do too much lemon. The classic, oh, my buzzer just went off again. The typical ratio of acid to oil when you're making a vinaigrette is 1 part acid, 3 parts oil. That doesn't mean that's what you have to do. Like I just said, I love lemon juice, so I go a bit more acidic. I might even do like 50-50, but just to keep that in mind for this vinaigrette and future vinaigrettes you do. All right, I'm gonna go grab my bread. It's probably done, hopefully. So I'll be back in a minute. All right, this bread looks awesome. Nice and toasty. Hopefully you can see that. Oops. I want to show like this piece is nice and toasty and crunchy. So yeah, this is going to be delicious. So I'm setting this aside. Like I said, we don't need the bread right now or the pine nuts. So we can just let these cool and we'll keep going with our vinaigrette. So if your bread or pine nuts are not ready yet, that's totally fine. Just let them keep toasting. All right, back to our vinaigrette. So again, all we have in here is grated garlic, grated Parmesan, and lemon juice. That's all we've got so far. So the next thing we're gonna do is olive oil.
Bev is asking, she just said, I discovered the avocado bread company. Really delicious. It does have some guacamole seasoning with seeds and grains.
Well, I just, I don't know if you've ever heard of this bread. It was
Avocado bread.
recommended, I know, it was recommended by the chef at Community Servings.
Oh,
And
nice.
it has, you know, a little bit of guacamole spice, but I just wanted to mention it because it's really good. And I'm just using up the loaf in this recipe. So we'll see how it goes with the Italian taste.
Yeah, oh, I'm sure it'll be great. I've never heard of that before. Okay, so I just added olive oil to this. The recipe says a 1/4 cup, but again, you can eyeball it, totally fine. And next is a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. I'm just taking a pinch. Might go a little heavier. And then 1/8 of a teaspoon of black pepper. I'm doing another pinch of that. And we can also do, if you're okay with a little spicy, you can do some red chili flakes. You don't have to, it's definitely optional. And also, if you don't like spicy, but you're making food for someone who does like spicy food in your house, they can add red pepper flakes later as a garnish. All right, so now we're just whisking. So again, olive oil, lemon juice, garlic, Parmesan, salt, pepper, and red pepper flakes. That's what's in this vinaigrette. So obviously the Parmesan cheese doesn't dissolve, so it's gonna be a little chunky. That's totally fine. It just is gonna come out really delicious. So I encourage you to taste it. Again, knowing that this vinaigrette is going to be coating everything in the salad, you want this to be a very strong flavor because it's gonna be like kind of diluted as it coats everything else. Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, it's very acidic and the salt and pepper are like kind of strong, but as that coats everything else, it's not gonna taste this strong. If you don't think it's strong enough, add more of whatever you like as well. Okay. So, vinaigrette is made. I'm gonna put this right next to my cutting board because at this point, everything we prep goes right into this bowl and gets mixed in. So I recommend you have a silicone spatula on hand, if you have one of those, or just like a large mixing spoon, because you're gonna wanna very gently toss all the ingredients when we add them into this bowl. So, like I said, putting this right next to me. Those of you cooking along, how are you doing? Any issues going too fast? Doing okay? All right. Good. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna do, these are two ingredients that are typically not in a panzanella salad. Where's the camera? I'm trying to find that camera on the phone. Cannellini beans, these are canned, so they're rinsed, or drained and rinsed very well to remove a lot of that salty brine. And then these are mozzarella bocconcini, so it's like the small balls of mozzarella. And we're just gonna dump these on the cutting board and chop them together. It's gonna be a really rough chop. It doesn't have to be a lot. We're not trying to like mince it. We're just trying to break it up so that when it gets tossed into the vinaigrette, there's areas of the beans and the mozzarella that are more susceptible to like absorbing the vinaigrette. So, like I said, just a rough chop. So I'm just kind of spreading it and I'm just like chopping the mozzarella balls in half. And as I do that, the cannellini beans get chopped. Really just a quick, easy chop. And once you feel like it's good enough, add that into your bowl with the vinaigrette and toss it around. So I just broke up the mozzarella a little bit. Some of the beans got broken. I might do a little more to break up the beans. Cannellini beans are pretty big and they're like a very smooth outside. So I feel like it gives a more interesting texture if we can break up that smooth outer layer. All right. So I'm scooping this up, putting it into my vinaigrette. And I'll bring the vinaigrette over so you can see. So we've got this in here, taking my silicone spatula and just tossing it around. Not gonna go crazy because this is gonna get tossed more and more with the more ingredients we add. So setting this aside now. Next, we're gonna move on to our veggies. So we've got some tomatoes. These are plum tomatoes, but you can use any kind of tomato you like. Plum tomatoes I like because they're a bit more firm. Like heirloom tomatoes or like any like really wide tomatoes. Sometimes there's too much of like a juicy inside and they kind of just like fall apart more easily. Obviously all tomatoes are juicy, but these ones are a bit more firm. We've also got a cucumber here. This is a seedless cucumber. Seedless cucumbers do have little seeds in there, but they're very, very delicate and they don't like crunch when you bite them. We've also got an onion. We're not going to use, this was a very big onion, so I cut it in half, but we're not even going to use this half. We're only going to use a quarter of it. If you really like raw onion, feel free to add more, but we're going to go a little light on the onion. All right, so we're going to start with the tomatoes first. So we're going to cut the ends off. Here's where you test the sharpness of your knife. If it cuts through that tomato really easily, then you have a nice sharp knife. If not, maybe consider sharpening it. Okay, so we just cut the end off. The other end, there's no need to cut it off because there's no stem or anything. I'm gonna hold it on either side and we're gonna cut lengthwise in half. All right, I can do that with both of them. And so here's where I like to talk about how the shape and size of your ingredients in your dishes really affects your enjoyment of these foods. So, for example, I love like a cucumber tomato salad. I don't like when it's big chunks because that to me is like annoying to eat. So I would rather have slices. So I'm going to show you how I think that this salad is best, but this is just preference. If you like cubes, go ahead and do cubes. Whatever type of cut you enjoy, that's what you should do. But what I like to do is what's called a half moon. So obviously a full moon would be the full circle. Half moon is half the circle. So I'm laying them on the flat side, putting them, lining them up together and cutting some nice thin half moons. And this is how I'm going to cut the cucumber also. And the onion is going to be quarter moons because my onion was really big. If it was a small onion, I could do half moon. But onion is definitely, raw onion specifically, is something that I think, I enjoy thinly sliced red onion in a salad. I do not at all enjoy a giant chunk of raw red onion. So I'm going to be cutting mine very thin. This is going right into the vinaigrette bowl. Okay, and then we'll do the other tomatoes. So I'm lining them up. And you'll notice that I'm not lifting my knife up and down like this. I'm keeping the tip of my knife on the cutting board and sliding. Kind of rocking it down and sliding to cut. That gives you a lot of good leverage if you keep the tip of your knife on the cutting board. And also to make, using a big kitchen knife a bit more comfortable on your wrist. A good way to hold your knife is to hold it like, it's easier I think if we do the, this one. So I'm not holding it down here, all the way down on the handle, because then look at my arm is not in the same line as the knife. However, if I pinch this top of the blade here, and I wrap the rest of my fingers around, my arm is much more in line. It's not exactly in line, but it's much more in line with the knife blade, in line like this, making it less pressure on my wrist. So it makes it more ergonomic, more comfortable. All right, so the rest of this tomato is going in. Let's cut the cucumber as well. So it was a very large cucumber. I already cut it in half before class. I'm going to cut a little bit, this little end off the cucumber. All right. And because this is so long, I'm just going to make it easier on myself. Cut it in half again. Then cut lengthwise, like we did with the tomato. Lengthwise, flip it onto the flat side so it doesn't roll away. Same with the other part, flip it to the flat side. All right, and we're doing half moons with these as well. So again, keep the tip of your knife on the cutting board. Don't let it leave the cutting board. And you just kind of pivot or like scooch it over as you cut. And I'm using my other hand to scooch the cucumber up toward the blade. This is where you probably, if you've ever done other cooking classes or watched a chef cut anything, chefs, I'm not a chef, but I've learned from a lot of chefs. Chefs can use a big, giant, sharp knife with their eyes closed because they trust their hands so well. They trust their hands so much while they're on the cutting board here. Chefs will always curl their fingers under. They, instead of like holding their food like this, they curl their fingers and they use their knuckles to guide the blade. However, I said I'm not a chef. I don't feel totally comfortable doing that, truthfully. I try my best, and I do like to practice doing that because that's what the pros do. But if you can't do that, that's okay. Just do your best to be safe. You definitely don't want to risk cutting yourself at all. All right, so we've got the cucumber and the tomato all cut. So we're gonna give that a gentle toss in the vinaigrette bowl. Okay. So now the vinaigrette is spreading around. If you were unsure if you had enough vinaigrette or if you had the right, acidity and oil amount and salt and pepper, you can add more of all of those things at the end. All right, so here we go. We've got mozzarella, cannellini bean, tomato, and cucumber with the dressing so far. So putting that back to the side. And now we're gonna do our onion. So like I said, I have a red onion. It was very big, so I already cut it in half. You'll notice that I didn't cut it in half across. I left the root and the plant end intact. Keeping this root end intact when you cut an onion is very helpful. All of the layers of the onion come down to the root and the root holds them together. So let the root help you. Onion layers fall apart very easily, but if you keep that root intact, it will help you very much. So, all right, I've still got this papery outside, but like I said, I'm gonna do only a quarter and probably not even that. I'm gonna eyeball it again, but I'm gonna cut again. I wanna keep that root. I'm not gonna chop the root off, but I'm cutting this into a quarter of an onion. I'm gonna get all these little root pieces off my cutting board. And when you cut your onion, that makes it easier to peel it. If you try to peel it before you've cut your onion, it's really difficult. And if you have any layers that have kind of a weird thing on them, just peel that layer off. And then you've got a nice clean layer underneath. All right. So like I said, the moon thing, the half moon, quarter moon with the onion, because this is a quarter of an onion, these are going to be quarter moon slices. However, I've got a little bit of like papery end here. I'm just gonna chop that off and discard it. But so obviously these layers fall apart. Once you put an onion slice, the layers fall apart into like arcs. But that's totally fine. That's what we want to happen. We want small, really skinny pieces of red onion. Because too much, a big chunk of red onion, some people
So
love
she's
it,
making
but not for me.
she's making a nice salad with cannellini beans.
I think we have somebody unmuted. Yeah, so I'm just gonna cut a little bit more. What I'm cutting is I'm probably gonna be using like an eighth of the onion. Half of the quarter. So obviously these then fall apart into little arcs. That's great. So I'm gonna throw these in. I might assess, I could add a little bit more. Now that I see the onion in the, like with the rest of the salad ingredients, I can add more. If you're gonna be cooking onion, it definitely doesn't matter to cut it so thin. Depending on how you're cooking it. Like some people, it's grilling season. Some people like to grill vegetable skewers and they do like a big chunk of red onion and it gets nice and charred and cooked. Like that's great. But if it's raw, you definitely want to make it a thinner piece. All right, so I'm gently tossing this again, making sure that's where the silicone spatula comes in handy. I'm making sure that I scoop up the liquids from the bottom. And I'm this is, if anyone has ever made muffins, they say you should fold the batter. So this motion that I'm doing is folding. So it's using a silicone spatula, scooping it around and flipping it over, scooping it around, flipping it over. This is just a good technique for gently mixing. All right. So we've got our tomato, cucumber, and onion in the salad, all getting nice and marinated with that vinaigrette. So the next thing we're gonna do is I hope that those of you that have cooked along, hopefully your bread is toasted by now, because I'm actually gonna add the bread in now. If it's not toasted, that's okay. You can add the bread in last if you need to. Changing my glove. Bring a time check, so 10 after 6. All right. So let me bring this back under the camera. And I've got my nice toasty bread. I don't know if you could like hear, it's crunching. Zoom is very good at filtering out background noise, and sometimes it filters out the sizzle and the crunch and those kind of noises that are helpful for cooking classes, but that's okay. All right, I'm adding all of this toasted bread into this bowl. So you might be wondering, why are you adding the bread and it's gonna get soggy? So panzanella salad is actually meant for the bread to like soak in the vinaigrette basically. And this is a part of the reason why this salad is really great as leftovers. Because the longer it sits, the more flavorful it gets. It's one of those dishes. Okay. So I gave that a rough toss. We're gonna keep tossing with the addition of other ingredients, but I'm just gonna leave that to the side. All right, so the next ingredient we're working on is fresh basil. Let me turn noise suppression to low. Oh, I haven't ever made that adjustment. Maybe I should. Thank you for the tip. Okay, so I've got some fresh basil here, and I'm got a lucky basil sprig that has the actual flower on here, which is really cute. So we're gonna pull, oh, this is so fragrant. I love basil. It's such a good smell. All right, so we're pulling these leaves off the stem. So with basil, it's, one of the easiest way to do that, I think, is to pull the leaves to one side and pull those off the stem. Because they grow like symmetrically, like there's a leaf on both sides all the way up the stem. And I think in the recipe it says 3 basil sprigs. I have 2 large sprigs. So I stopped with 2, but if you're a basil lover, go for it. If you have a lot of basil and you don't know how to use it, go ahead and put it in this, whatever you'd like. But I've got all the leaves off here. So basil is a very delicate herb. It can bruise very easily. I'm sure you've bought basil from the store and it looked really good, and then after it was in your, grocery bag, it got kind of like the leaves got folded and they got a little browned, and they're not as pretty when you bring them home or after you like mess with them. So with that said, basil, it's very good to wait until like the last, wait until like the end of the recipe to prepare your basil. You can either tear it by hand or you can chiffonade it. Chiffonade is like a fun culinary term. So you just watched me stack up all my basil leaves. So stack them up, roll them up into like a tight little roll. And then you take your knife. So it's rolled this way, okay? And then I'm gonna thinly slice this way. This is how to chiffonade basil. You're slicing it into thin ribbons. So you can do this, or you can just tear by hand. Either way, it comes out tasting the same. But with this, you get like long, skinny ribbons. So that's what we've got for this basil. I'm not gonna put all of this in the salad. I'm gonna do most of it. I'll save just like a little bit as a garnish. So I'm setting that aside. Hopefully I remember to use that later. I'll put it next to my pine nuts so I won't forget to use it. Okay, so this basil I'm tossing in to my big bowl, stirring it around. So we don't have a whole lot left to do. So I wanted to make sure we got ahead before I talked about some nutrition related things. But So I wanted to talk a bit about like what makes this version of a panzanella salad more filling than the classic one. So there are lots of things we added to this panzanella salad that are not typically in it. That includes the mozzarella, the cannellini beans, pine nuts. We haven't done this yet, but we're adding olives, optional, but as a garnish, olives as well. And we changed the bread to be a whole wheat bread or whole grain bread. So all of those changes make this more filling. Whole grain bread, I mentioned this a little bit while we were cutting it, but any type of whole grain compared to a refined or processed grain, whole grains are higher in fiber, higher in protein, higher in healthy fats, higher in lots of different minerals and vitamins, lots of B vitamins, iron, all kinds of good stuff. But when grains are processed, most of that disappears. And the reason they do that is to increase the shelf life. So, you know, maybe you can keep white rice in your cabinet for a really long time, but if you've got whole grains in your cabinet, those don't last quite as long. They still last a long time, but not as long as white rice would. So adding the whole wheat grain roll is good. Sorry, question?
Yeah, Andrea was wondering what other additions can be added to the salad.
Yeah, so I mean, if you are a meat eater or fish eater, you could add like, you know, canned tuna, like shredded tuna, not shredded, but like, you know, pulled apart tuna. You could also add shredded chicken. You could add some fish, some nice like grilled or roasted fish. Lots of different items to add to this. As far as, you know, ingredients, maybe not like additional protein items. The reason I chose the ingredients I did is knowing that this was an Italian, you know, panzanella salad is an Italian dish. So I wanted to choose ingredients that complement those flavors. Cannellini beans or white beans, these are used in Italian cooking very often. I wouldn't have added black beans because that's more like Latin American, like that doesn't make as much sense with this dish. You totally could, if you only love black beans, go for it, do that. But I also added the mozzarella because obviously mozzarella is you know, an Italian ingredient as well. You could go for shredded mozzarella instead of the balls if you prefer, or you could do like, you know, serve this salad and then get like a big juicy burrata cheese and put that on top and cut it and let it ooze onto the salad. So lots of good stuff. Somebody asked if we're ready to plate. If you like olives, I do have some olives. These are just, you know, mixed olives with no pits. Pits have been removed. I'm just gonna sort of like rough chop these. You can slice them if you would rather. They're obviously slippery because they're oily, but olives, another Italian ingredient, not only Italian, obviously olives grow in other places too, but olives are a great source of healthy fat. Obviously olive oil comes from olives. If you use extra virgin olive oil, that's essentially like fresh pressed juice from olives. So extra virgin olive oil is like, you know, has as many nutrients as olives do. Well, I guess not really, because olives are technically fruits. They're made of carbohydrates, but they're very high in fat. Obviously, that's what the juice is. The juice is the fat that comes out of them. So olive oil will have a lot of the same micronutrients like vitamins and minerals as olives. So I got these chopped olives. I'm going to set these to the side as a garnish. And then another thing that I added, this is not, you know, adding any significant amount of protein or, you know, fiber, yes, but this is just to kind of like bulk up the salad a little bit if you'd like, or to help with the display, make it a little pretty. This is butter lettuce. You've had this before. It's very like delicate and like, it's not like a super crunchy lettuce. It's like velvety. It's like soft lettuce, if that makes sense. But these leaves are great for like lettuce wraps. I made this recipe with a student group earlier in the month, and somebody, you know, I gave them the lettuce and said like, you can put it on the bottom of the plate and put the salad on top, or you can chop up the lettuce or mix it in. And I looked over and one of the students was eating it as a lettuce wrap. had put the panzanella salad in the lettuce and rolled it up and was like eating it like a taco. I was like, yeah, that works too. So you can do whatever you like with these. I like to use them as like a pretty display. So now we're ready to plate. So I've got like a platter here, like a long skinny platter. So what I'm gonna do is just place the butter lettuce leaves, and like I just said, you can cut these up if you prefer, or use them as lettuce wraps, whatever you'd like. But it just gives like a little more volume to your salad. If you're feeling like the salad is like not quite big enough, then you can add more to it. All right, so got them kind of strewn about. And then I'm gonna scoop actually I'm gonna use my hands because it's easier. I'm just gonna scoop this salad right onto the platter here. Right down the middle. Making sure that I scoop up from the bottom of the bowl because I want to get all that good vinaigrette. So if you're serving this to your family tonight, you can put this on a platter and have everybody serve themselves from the platter. Or you can, you know, make a plate for each person or have them make their own plates, whatever you prefer. I think I saw a question just come in, but I didn't see what it said.
Yes, James asked, do you have nutritional information for the salad as described in the recipe?
I don't on me, but I can definitely get that for you. It might take me a couple days to like do the calculations and stuff, but I'm happy to send that. So right now I'm sprinkling the olives that I chopped, sprinkling those over the top. I've also got my basil that I saved for a garnish. I'm sprinkling that on the top as well. And then I've got my pine nuts. Doing that over the top. So the pine nuts, I am a big proponent of adding a crunchy topping. Whenever I'm making, you know, meals at home, my boyfriend and I will say like, okay, it needs a crunchy. What kind of crunchy? And we're like, oh, let's do like toasted cashews or make some breadcrumbs real quick and like garlicky breadcrumbs in the food processor and throw that on. So crunchy on top really makes a difference with the enjoyment of your meal. All right, make sure I'm not forgetting anything. So at this point, give it a taste. If you feel like it needs more lemon juice, you probably have still another half of your lemon. Or if it needs like a little bit of olive oil drizzled on top, I tend to do that every time I eat things. You can do a little bit of salt and pepper on top, or some people like finishing salt, which is like very, very thin, flaky, translucent salt flakes, just to add a little touch of salt on top. It doesn't really add a lot of sodium. It's just like to make it fancy. So you could do that. But yeah, this is the salad. I'm gonna put this on the grid view because I'd love to see everybody. And if you cooked along, please do share show me a picture of your dish. I'd love to see it. And let's see, what other questions did I miss? I'm gonna look at the chat right now. Okay, Greek version of this can probably be made with feta and chickpeas. Yeah, that's a great idea. That's a really great idea. A lot of Italian ingredients are also Greek ingredients. So like the tomato, the cucumber, the onion, you know, maybe you throw in like a different herb instead of basil, but you could do that. So yeah, you could definitely do that. Let's see what other questions we have. I'm happy you all enjoyed.
I'm trying to get mine up there. I'm not sure you can see.
Oh, yeah. That's awesome, yay.
Yeah,
So
quite
it's on
tell
the
with the
table.
camera.
Is that on the table or is that the counter?
Yes.
Nice, that's great.
Delicious.
Yeah, it's really like, I mean, you saw how easy that was. Like, I feel like it doesn't happen very often that I finish with time to spare. It's usually like 1 hour, sometimes even goes over, as Deb, you have seen. But yeah, that just goes to show how easy this is. And like we talked about, you know, if you wanted to add, oh, Andrea, let's see. Nice. That's great. What do you have on the plate with it?
Oh, we just made a sandwich along with it.
Awesome, that's great. But yeah, so you can add other like animal proteins if you like, or increase the amount of cheese or oil or, you know, the pine nuts and the olives are very filling. You can increase that as well. Do more bread, different kinds of bread that are more filling to you. There's lots of different ways you can modify this. So we've got a couple minutes left. Anybody have questions or anything I can clarify? Maybe not.
Actually, I have a question about basil real quick. So do you recommend tearing it or cutting it?
You can do either way, honestly. Cutting it, if you're gonna cut it, you wanna make sure you have a sharp knife. If it's a dull knife, then it kind of like beats up the basil unnecessarily and it gets it extra bruised. If you have a nice sharp knife and it just cuts right through it, then that's great. But tearing it is like reducing like the trauma to the leaf. You know, it's just ripping the leaf apart. There's nothing that's like cutting through it, you know? So it reduces the bruising. It's also, I think, just like faster and easier to rip it. You could just like pick up the leaves and just kind of rip them apart and throw them in, and like that's it. So either way works.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions or any suggestions for what we could add or change in this dish to make it different? We've had some good suggestions so far.
We have one from Andrea again saying, how do you prevent the canned beans from getting mushy?
Getting mushy. So canned beans, especially cannellini, because they're so big and they're starchier than a lot of beans, they do tend to get a little mushy. I would say two options. One is you could get, so cannellini beans are the ones that are in this recipe that are kind of big, but there are small white beans in cans that you can buy as well. So they give you the same, you know, flavor, the same nutrition, but they're just like small. So those don't mush as much. But if you're wanting cannellini beans, you could do cooked beans from a dry state rather than having canned beans. Canned beans get mushier because they're sitting in liquid, so they absorb all that liquid. But if you ever cook beans, it's like a little bit of a long process. You have to like take the dry beans, you soak them in your fridge overnight, and then you cook them in water for like a couple hours. So it takes a bit of time. It's one of those things where you can do it and then walk away and do something else. So it's not like active cooking time, but it takes a lot of like remembering that you have to put that in the fridge and remembering to start dinner 2 hours earlier, that kind of thing. But if you want to do that, it's cheaper to buy dry beans because you can buy a huge amount for really cheap. And they tend to like keep their shape and they're a bit more firm. So that would be an option. And that goes for all beans, not just cannellini. The canned ones tend to be a bit softer, but if you buy the dried beans and cook them yourself, then they're a bit more firm.
Andrea also said, I think some farro might be good to throw in there too, cooked or cooked.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Farro, F-A-R-R-O, is a type of wheat, and that grain is used a lot in Italian cooking as well. It's a whole grain, so like I was saying, whole grains have more fiber, more protein, more healthy fats. So they also keep their shape, like talking about the beans as well. Whole grains tend to keep their shape better than, I keep using white rice as an example. You know, if you overcook white rice, it turns into mush. If you overcook farro, I would say it's really hard to overcook farro. You can, but it has more of like a texture when you bite into it. So yeah, you could absolutely add farro to this for sure. For sure. Farro, because it's a type of wheat, it does contain gluten. We used, you know, wheat bread in this, so that has gluten as well. But when I made this recipe for a student group a couple weeks ago that I was talking about, one of the students is gluten-free. So we did just gluten-free toasted bread for her. So there are lots of other gluten-free grains that you could add if you wanted to add a grain, but farro would not be one of those because it's in the wheat family. But that is a great suggestion to add that. That would be another good, like I get the feeling of like, you know, needing to have like a little bit of extra starch to make it feel like a filling meal. So that would definitely help that for sure. So I'm seeing that we're at 6:30 now. Thank you all for being here, for sticking around. If you have any additional questions, I'm happy to answer them. But like I said, now that you've all been in this class, you'll be on the email list for future classes. And I hope I will see you there. So thank you all so much. Enjoy your meals and have a great night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.